The forest was dark and silent, as night's last shadows retreated into hidden hollows. The air hung heavy with moisture, as dew clung to leaves and branches. The volunteers arriving early at the sanctuary gate felt the weight of something unseen. Watching from the tree line, their flashlights bobbed gently in their hands, casting shaky beams into the gloom. One volunteer paused and leaned forward, squinting toward a distant mound of brambles. She spotted a small shape curled beneath thorny vines, something soft, something vulnerable. Something drew her feet forward, though her mind screamed caution. As she approached slowly, a hush seemed to fall across the clearing. The wind held its breath, even the usual chirping of crickets and rustle of leaves stilled in a moment of expectant waiting. She stepped closer and recognized cloth faint, but tattered, wrapped around a tiny form. Her heart quickened. She knelt and parted vines gingerly to expose the face of a baby, swaddled in a blanket, too thin to shield it from cold. The skin was dusky and thin. The baby's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Its eyes half open, glazed with confusion. The volunteer called to others in a soft, shaky voice. They crowded close, silent and motionless, as though afraid to break the fragile spell. The forest behind them resumed its life. Leaves trembled, distant branches swayed, but the rescue workers could not tear their eyes from the baby. They moved to lift it when a distant rustle reached their ears. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the forest. The volunteers froze. Their heads turned in tandem, scanning the undergrowth for movement. Two gleaming eyes appeared in the darkness just beyond their flashlight beams, eyes reflecting pale moonlit gleam. The volunteers held their breath. A shadow shifted, then another, and then two forms slunk forward low to the ground. Their movements fluid and deliberate, their silhouettes distinct. Bobcats pause silent on leaf litter, their coats mottled tawny, brown blending with shadows. The larger of the two halted at the tree line, watching the group intently. Its ears twitched. The smaller stayed partly in cover, observing the baby cradled in the volunteers' arms. No one dared move. The volunteers exchanged fearful glances. The instinct to protect warred with dread. The Bobcats did not advance nor retreat. They seemed to contemplate the scene. The volunteer holding the baby lowered it slightly to make sure no harm fell. The larger Bobcat stepped forward, slowly but not with malice. Its tail arched but remained still. Its eyes fastened on the baby, as though it recognized in that infant some kindred spark. The smaller Bobcat emerged, now fully its body, tense but not aggressive. The volunteers felt the hairs on their arms rise. The larger Bobcat halted at a safe distance, watching intently. The smaller moved a bit further, showing more of its flank. Neither approached beyond their comfort zone, yet neither withdrew. Suspense stretched across the forest, as though time slackened. The volunteers did not breathe. The baby whimpered as though sensing distant tension. The wind stirred once in the leaves above. A branch shook. Something moved far off in deeper forest, but no shape could be made out. The Bobcats glanced toward that direction, then returned their gaze to the group. The volunteers wished to call sanctuary staff and wildlife biologists, but no one dared speak. The moment held them captive in awe and fear. Then the larger Bobcat blinked, slowly flicked an ear in the direction of the deeper woods, then shifted its stance. Its muscles rippled. It crouched slightly as though preparing to move, but the tension remained electric. The volunteers realized the Bobcats might act at any moment. They braced, each volunteer inching backward to give room. The baby squirmed slightly, and one volunteer instinctively raised it closer to her chest. The Bobcats held their ground, not advancing, not retreating. They waited as though waiting for a signal, or permission. The forest slept around them. The darkness pressed close. Every rustle felt loaded with meaning. Then the larger Bobcat gave a soft, low sound so faint, the volunteers almost doubted they heard it. A growl, perhaps, not a threat, but a summons. The smaller Bobcat locked eyes with the lead volunteer and held its stare. Those eyes glowed raw, wild, and commanding. The volunteer's chest tightened with fear and wonder. She felt the weight of their gaze as though they weighed her intention, and found it wanting or promising. The other volunteers held their positions, frozen in the flashlight halos. The baby whimpered again, One volunteer raised her voice to speak, but the larger bobcat flicked its tail, and that moment cut the air and she closed her lips. The baby began to fuss, bringing tension to a sharp point. The bobcat stiffened. The shadows around them deepened as though more eyes watched from off stage. The volunteers feared that any sudden movement might unravel the moment. Then the smaller bobcat repositioned itself closer to the larger, as if aligning for action or defense. But still, it did not move further toward the group. The silence stretched unbearably. The volunteers dared not even blink. The baby's cries threatened to shatter the hush. But before the sound could escalate, the larger bobcat turned abruptly and padded back into the underbrush. The smaller followed, leaving only their eyes shining briefly in the gloom. Then both vanished into darkness, as though swallowed by night. The volunteers released, held breath. Their knees felt weak. Their hearts raced. They exchanged looks of relief and awe. But the forest felt changed, as though a threshold had been crossed. The wind resumed in the leaves. The forest. Noises returned slowly. The volunteers hurried inside the sanctuary with the baby cradled between them. Their steps echoed on the path. Every snap of twig underfoot felt like an answering echo from unseen watchers. The sanctuary walls loomed ahead. But outside in the dark, the forest waited. Two pairs of eyes watched from shadowed distance. The night held its secrets, and the volunteers would soon learn that this was only the beginning of what those bobcats intended and what that baby would awaken in their wild hearts. The moon was still high when the bobcats returned to the clearing, their coats glinting in silver light. Their movements slow, deliberate, full of quiet power. Their steps barely made a sound across the forest floor. A larger one paused beside the flattened grass where the baby had been hours before, and sniffed deeply, then raised its head with a low breath that vibrated through the cold morning air. The smaller bobcat came close beside it, touching noses briefly. Before circling the space with quick, light steps, their tails twitched, their ears flicked as if listening for a sound, just out of reach back inside the sanctuary. The baby slept wrapped now in warm blankets, lying inside a small wooden crib made from reclaimed pine. One of the volunteers sat nearby, exhausted eyes heavy with sleep, but unwilling to look away even for a moment. No one had called social services yet. No one quite knew why. There was a sense that doing so might disturb something, ancient and delicate, something sacred. A quiet agreement had spread across the staff, as if they all understood instinctively that this child was not simply abandoned, but placed here on purpose for a reason none could name. The next night, the bobcats came again, moving low between the trees, sticking close to the shadows, their eyes reflecting light in quick flickers. They did not enter the fenced sanctuary grounds, but circled its edges silently, their heads tilted toward the window where the baby now slept. Something passed between them, some ancient signal that neither human nor science could explain. They lay together near the outer fence, unmoving through the long night, never once taking their eyes off the dim light behind the glass. Inside, the building. The baby stirred at random moments, not from hunger, not from discomfort, but as if feeling something reaching out across the space between the woods and the crib. The lead volunteer watched from a nearby cot, her journal open beside, her recording everything she could remember, but the words on the page felt hollow, too small for the weight of what she was seeing. She looked once toward the window and could have sworn she saw a flicker of movement, but when she blinked, there was only darkness and the rustle of wind in pine branches. Over the next week, the bobcats came each night first, just the two, then more. Two became 4, then 6. Not all came close, but all watched from some distance, some hidden deep in the trees, only visible by the light of a flashlight sweeping past their eyes. Others perched quietly along fallen logs, unmoving, as though obeying rules known only to them. No fences were crossed, no growls given. They were not tame, not docile, not pets, and yet they gathered with a reverence that frightened and fascinated everyone at the sanctuary. Staff began taking turns at the window, unsure if they were guarding or witnessing something they could not explain. A kind of ritual, maybe, or a wild vow. The baby remained calm, slept deeply, ate well, never cried without reason, and always reached one tiny hand toward the window, as if greeting something waiting outside. One evening, while the sun bled into the horizon, the lead volunteer stepped outside. The building walked slowly toward the fence, her eyes locked on the spot where the bobcats waited. Their eyes met hers, the air charged with tension. She did not speak, did not make sudden moves, simply knelt by the fence, her breath shallow, heart thudding inside her chest. The larger bobcat stood and walked forward, not close, not threatening, but enough to show that it saw her, that it measured her, that it remembered her. It sat on its haunches and tilted its head as if trying to understand her. The silence pressed heavy as the sun dipped fully behind the ridge and darkness swallowed the last of the orange light. She stayed until the stars came out and only returned inside when her legs had gone numb and the bobcat had finally turned away into the trees. That night, the baby refused to sleep unless moved closer to the window, its eyes locked on the darkness. Beyond the glass, as if searching for something familiar, its breathing slowed only when it could see the silhouettes of the trees and the faint glimmer of those distant glowing eyes. Staff took shifts watching too. The tension grew with every passing. Night, something was building like a storm gathering far off, but not yet touching the earth. Something none of them wanted to speak aloud. Then came the first prints. The lead volunteer found them at dawn tracks too large to be normal. Too heavy too. Deliberate, they circled the outer fence and looped around toward the back of the building, then vanished into the woods nearby. The usual bobcat tracks remained small, light scattered in ways consistent with their known behavior. But these new prints were different. The pads wider, the claws deeper, the gait heavier. Someone or something else had been watching from deeper in the forest. The bobcats reacted too. They became more alert, more focused. Their visits grew longer, more still. They lay side by side outside the fence, never fully relaxing. Their ears twitched constantly. They stared not just at the building now, but toward the deeper woods behind them. Their tails flicked with impatience, as if waiting for a challenge they had not yet seen. The volunteers began to whisper at night, their voices hushed as they wondered if they had mistaken the bobcats' original intent. Perhaps this was not protection. Perhaps it was warning. On the 7th night after the baby's arrival, the air turned colder than before. A sharp wind cutting through the sanctuary as though carrying with it a message. The baby woke 3 times, crying not from hunger, but from something else. Something inside its bones. The lead volunteer sat beside it, humming, low and soft, but the sound did not seem to help. The baby's eyes stayed wide, locked on the window where the bobcats waited unmoving, even as frost began to form along the ground. Just past midnight, a sound split the forest, something between a howl and a scream echoing across the trees. The bobcats rose as one, bodies tense, muscles coiled like springs. The sanctuary staff jolted awake, spilling coffee and flashlights clattering to the floor. Every heartbeat faster. Every breath seemed too loud. The baby fell silent, its eyes wide, staring toward the noise. The bobcats made no sound, no move to flee, no sign of fear, only readiness, as if the moment they waited for had finally arrived. The lead volunteer stepped outside again, wrapped in a thick coat, flashlight trembling in her hand. She scanned the trees but saw nothing, only the bobcats all facing the same direction toward the dark line of forest, untouched by light, untouched by human understanding. She took one step closer to the fence, and the larger bobcat turned its head to meet her eyes. Something ancient passed between them, an understanding, or maybe a plea. And then it turned back toward the darkness, raised its head, and let out a sound so low and deep it made her chest vibrate, like a drumbeat from the earth itself. The wind stopped completely. The trees stilled the sanctuary behind her, quiet as death. The other bobcats followed suit, each rising to stand, each releasing the same low sound, and in unison, they turned and disappeared. Into the woods, not with fear, but with purpose. The volunteer watched until the last tail vanished into shadow, then turned back toward the building, her heart thundering with a realization that would not form into words. Inside, the baby had fallen, asleep again, but its hand remained stretched toward the window, its fingers open as if still reaching for something, still waiting for someone, still hearing something no one else could. And the forest outside no longer felt like a collection of trees and animals, but something older, something watching, something remembering, something approaching. Morning came slow and cold, with fog settling over the sanctuary, like a second skin, The volunteers moved through the gray light, speaking little, their minds still wrapped in the strange energy of the night before the bobcats were gone. Their prints, barely visible in the wet grass. But the feeling they left behind clung to every surface, heavy and electric like static before a storm. The lead volunteer kept close to the baby, who now slept longer than usual. Its breath slow and even, but its hand still reaching toward the window, even in dreams. By mid-morning, the sanctuary's head biologist arrived, called in, after several silent alerts had been triggered on the trail cams. She reviewed footage, with narrowed eyes watching the blurred shapes moving just beyond the fences at night. Some were clearly bobcats, their forms familiar even in shadows, but others were larger, lower to the ground. Their movements slow and deliberate, not like wild predators hunting, more like something surveying, as if marking territory that had once been theirs. She froze the frame on a still image where two bobcats stood nose to nose with something not clearly seen, but just behind them was the glint of eyes, yellow and high off the ground, too high for anything native to the region. The team searched the perimeter, finding more of the strange tracks near the northeast fence line, deeper than before, and this time closer, as if whatever it was had moved in bolder, now braver. No signs of damage, no attempts at entry, only presence. Like a warning left in the soil, the bobcats had not returned since their silent departure the night before, and their absence felt wrong. Not empty, but expectant, like a pause before something irreversible. That night, the wind returned, but not gently. It blew sharp across the treetops, making branches creak and sway with unease. The baby woke again, not crying, just staring at the window with eyes wide and glassy, like it could see through the dark, like it recognized something waiting just beyond the glass. The lead volunteer stayed beside it, fingers resting gently on its chest, trying to feel if its heartbeat raced like her own, but it remained steady, too. Steady, as if not frightened, but connected. Just after 2 a.m, the alarm by the rear trail triggered a low beep echoing in the staff hallway. The security monitor flickered, showing grainy footage of movement near the forest line. 3 shapes tall and slow and wrong. The camera struggled to focus, their outlines blurred against the trees, like they did not belong to the world of animals or men, just shadows with weight moving along the edge of sanctuary land. Staff scrambled to check doors, check windows, check the baby, but everything remained locked. Everything seemed untouched, except the air felt thinner, tighter, like it was being pulled toward something unseen. The baby's skin felt warm. Too warm. The lead volunteer placed a cool cloth across its forehead, whispering gently, but the baby did not flinch, did not stir, only blinked slowly, eyes still locked on the window, as if listening to something no one else could hear outside. The shadows passed the camera one final time before disappearing into the trees again, leaving no prints this time, only a strange smear on the lens, a dark shape like a hand with too many fingers, reaching outward before fading away. Morning light came fast and harsh, like the forest had rejected the night entirely. Birds stayed quiet longer than usual. Squirrels refused to move from their nests, and even the wind seemed unsure where to blow. The head biologist ran soil samples, ran camera diagnostics, consulted wildlife logs, but nothing matched, no behavior aligned with known species. No creature walked that way. No creature watched like that. No creature vanished so completely, without sound, without scent, without trace. The bobcats had not returned for 2 nights now, their absence stretching like a wire pulled too tight. Then just after sunset on the 3rd night, a noise rang through the forest, sharp and sudden, a yowl so deep it shook the windows. Not a cry of pain, not a warning. Something else, something old. The lead volunteer raced to the window and saw movement on the tree line, fast and coordinated, at least 6. Figures moving low and fast like ghosts in formation. And at the center of it, the unmistakable shape of the larger bobcat, its body hunched and limping, but alive. Its eyes bright with something fierce behind it, followed the others, each with heads. Low tails straight, moving as one unit, not as frightened prey, but as returning warriors. The baby stirred instantly, its eyes snapping open, its arms rising, as if calling them by name, as if waiting for their return. Since before its first breath, the staff gathered at the windows, watching breathless as the bobcats came closer. But then, stopped forming a loose half-circle near the northeast corner of the fence. Their eyes locked. Not on the building, not on the humans, not even on the baby, but on the forest beyond, where the shadows gathered deeper than usual, darker than night itself. Suddenly, all sound dropped. The wind stopped. The insects fell silent. The forest held its breath, and from the tree line came a shape not walking, but gliding almost as if the ground bent to meet its steps, its form shifting constantly, part beast, part shadow. Its eyes fixed straight ahead, glowing like lanterns in a fog. Its body too large, too long. Its face not quite real. It stepped toward the sanctuary, and the bobcats did not move. They stood their ground, tails high, heads low, forming a barrier of muscle. And instinct between that shape and what lay inside the building. The lead volunteer felt her throat tighten, her fingers gripping the edge of the crib without realizing her whole body tense. The baby made no sound, its eyes wide, its mouth slightly open, as if recognizing something. It could not explain something it had always known, and the figure at the tree line paused one long step from crossing into sanctuary ground, one foot hovering above the leaves,